Hey, Joe.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. How are things with you?
Um, Doing pretty good. Let me move this. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, things are going pretty well. Let me ask you a question. Did you
Yeah.
watch the Michael Dyson and Jordan Peterson debate last night?
No, I did not. Was it online?
Yeah, it's online. It was it was kind of bad. It's kind of bad.
Was that the
My,
one about free speech?
yes, and Michael Dyson said some pretty rough things to Jordan Peterson that I probably wouldn't say in a debate. That's impressive because I would say anything.
He went past your limits. That
I
is
mean,
impressive.
he basically said that like white people are evil, which okay, I understand. And then he's like Jordan Peterson. The only reason why he's famous because he's just some dirty old angry white man. I was
Wow.
like,
Man, that's harsh. I will have to watch that. I know I had seen like the ads for it and everything, so I was planning on watching it, but I didn't realize it had come yet. I thought it was like next month.
all right.
um, but as far as this one, so I was Catholic or Protestant for a long time, and all throughout that time, I would write all my papers about how to prove the existence of God. Because to me, I already recognized, even during that time, that before I was to believe in something, there had to be some level of certainty. And when I say proof, so belief in God is not rationally justified until after the believer has proven the existence of this God. I don't mean proven as in 100.0% certainty. I just mean proven, at least to a reasonable degree of certainty. Like, for instance, if you tell me Donald Trump is the president, I haven't seen Donald Trump. I've never met him. I've never talked to him. I've only been to Washington, D.C. once, and he wasn't the president when I was there. I have very little frame of reference to say that Donald Trump is the president. But there is a reasonable degree of evidence that I can base a conclusion off of. I can look at the media, and it's possible the media is lying, that all of them are lying, and actually Hillary Clinton is the president. Actually, it's entirely possible that an alien is the president, and I would have no way of knowing. But based on the evidence in front of me, there is a reasonable degree of certainty that I can put forward to say that it appears that Donald Trump really is the president of the United States. Now, I say this because it's important before we are to believe something that we have some reason to believe it. For instance, if you were to say Santa Claus is real, I'm not just going to believe you outright. There are a lot of things you could tell me which I'm not just going to believe you. If you say, hello, my name is actually Carter. I mean, it's possible, but based on the fact that you've been calling yourself Joe for all this time, I'm not really going to believe that your name is Carter. Possibility doesn't equal proof. The reason why this matters is when it comes to faith, there is a reasonable degree of faith that someone could have if they first have established a reasonable degree of certainty in the deity that they are believing in. But if they haven't first proven this deity, then what they are doing is just believing, and then that belief has no basis and no grounding in fact. So it's the same as believing in Santa Claus without evidence. It's the same as believing anything else. If you can first verify and then believe the elements that are beyond your comprehension, that's reasonable. And I knew this even when I was a Christian. So now that I'm agnostic, I still stand and I hold to that same exact standard. So I'd be interested to see what is your process to come to your epistemology of how you would believe.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for this, and I think you do raise some good points, and it's a good way to look at it for the theist because the theist does have some level of doubt because humans are naturally skeptic. Even those of the most ardent belief are still skeptical more often than not. So what I propose and what I continue to propose, can you still hear me? Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I had to let the cat out.
No, it's fine. So what I propose and what I continue to propose are two forms that lead to the justification and the belief of God. So first is the American pragmatic approach, not much unlike Jordan B. Peterson, which shows that the utility of the religion and the utility of the belief shows that if in essence it is true, therefore you ought to believe it. My second is pairing that with my own epistemology. I'm a Bayesian epistemologist. So what that means is I have conditional requirements. Now, as those conditional requirements against the other conditions are labeled up, we see what's the more probabilistic outcome of the universe in general. And I mean that, all right, so let's say we have the 6 arguments for God: the teleological, the ontological, the cosmological, et cetera, et cetera. And then we parse those against the attacks on those, which stands. And then we look at historical evidence and we see what stands and what doesn't stand. And then we think of the fine-tuning argument and we see what does stand and what does not stand. And then we conditionalize all of that and we have a probability. In that probability matrix, mixed with what I would consider the more stronger argument, the pragmatic approach, then we can see that the probability that there is a God and that God is true, therefore you ought to believe in him. That is how a believer can prove the existence of God, in so much as the utility and necessarily believing in God as a rational and justified action.
So where do you disagree with this resolution?
So it says belief in God is not rationally justified until after the believer has proven the existence of God. So my disagreement is that en masse, what counts as proving the existence of God, right? So this is more on the atheist. So how does an atheist set up his proof or disproof of God? This is more a question to you. How do you prove or disprove or not have enough proof to believe in God?
I don't think you and I disagree, actually, as I'm hearing your outline, because I would do it the same way you did. I did look at all of those arguments. I do look at all of those, and I think that you and I come to a different conclusion about where they lead. But
Okay.
I would agree with you that we put forward those 6 arguments. You look at the teleological, you look at the fine tuning, you look at Thomas's 5 ways, you look at each of these different arguments, and if these arguments to you come to a reasonable degree of certainty, then you would say, okay, I'm going to put faith in this deity. I think the only difference of opinion you and I might have then would be where is your percentage of probability? You call it a probability matrix. Are you saying 51%?
Yeah.
Determined faith?
Yeah.
51%.
So if I was so one of the ways of thinking about Bayesian versus frequentist probability, and especially with epistemology, so one, like, it's where you would bet the money. Like, it's not even necessarily that it has the greatest probability, but it's where would the greatest probability, and also maximizing what you would be betting, right? So let's say that there's a 60-40 matrix, right? So 60% of it says there is no God, and 40% says there is a God. Well, then you're like, well, why would I bet if the numbers are that close against the idea of God, right? So I could still, within reason, and be justified in betting the losing, because the outcome is better if I win, right? So it's not the same as like I should always bet on a lottery, because a lottery, there's like 0.9999999% of winning, and you paying money towards that costs more than the chance that you will win. But I'm willing to bet my money and bet my life, my soul, my belief system into the idea that Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior, and God is the Judaic-Christian God. Does that make sense? So
sure. Yeah, I think that the differentiation between you and I is that I require a higher level of proof before I am to put faith.
Right.
You put faith after 51%. I put it more after 92, 90, 95, something like that percent. So it's a higher level of proof that I would request first. And there are 2 reasons that I would say that. And the first reason here would be that of numerous gods. You are saying that if there's a 51% chance of a God, then you will put faith in Christianity. But there is just as much reason to believe in deism, or to believe in Buddhism, or to believe in Hinduism, or any of the other 4,000 plus different religions that currently exist, and the 40,000 different denominations even within those 4,000 religions. So even if you were to have a 51% chance of a God existing, that doesn't mean that you then put faith in one specific version of that God. You would have to have a much higher degree of certainty on that specific denomination before you were to put faith in that. And the second reason, the second thing that I would say is the reason I would have a higher percentage of proof required first would be that it changes how you act. If you are changing the way you look at the world and the way you act because of a 51% chance of something being true, you have radically shifted your overall, your entire existence over something that has basically a 50% chance of being accurate. That's not a good way of looking at things. If you can show something to a high degree of certainty, that would justify you changing your actions. But if, like, for instance, I say, I'm going to hate gay people. Obviously, that's not exactly what happens. But let's just say I will hate gay people if this coin comes up tails. Well, that's a pretty radical shift in how I'm going to act based on a 50% probability. That's not enough. But if there was a much stronger level of evidence, if it was up to, I can prove this religion to a 95% accuracy, then I'm willing to change the way I act in the rest of my life because I have a grounding point up to 95% certainty. That would be a rational basis to start from. But if you're starting at, I think there's a 51% chance this religion is right, so I'm going to change everything about my life based on that coin flip. It doesn't seem like enough.
Okay, so let's talk about the first one, the numerous gods. Actually, I don't think that this clashes as much as you may think, because I do think if we made a probability chart for all of the other religions, the one that would be pragmatically the most true, and then secondly, the probabilistically the most true would still be the Judeo-Christian God. And I think even in that, it would fall on the Catholics, even though myself, I am Catholic leaning, possibly a little bit Lutheran. So I don't believe in, I don't believe in sola scriptura. I believe that the Catholic Church has the right manifestation of tradition to be passed down. And I think that if we made a probability chart, we would see that the Catholic Church is most likely the correct church and the correct religion, because we can look at all the same arguments that lead us to believing in God for our probability matrix would still be stronger, because we still have Jesus's resurrection. It's probably true. Whether or not it happened, but it's still probably true, and it's pragmatically true, so we can label that as our conditional probability. Next, the break off from the churches. Well, we can look at how the churches have disintegrated over years, and we can look at the fundamental utility that the Catholic Church has versus the other denominations, and that would mean it would be more pragmatically true. So we sling that back in our probability matrix. And then we can compare it to the other religions of the world. Like the closest that you could get would be one of the Islamic religions. And even then, with that, then you have to go to the hadiths and what each hadith would say. And then that has to be done by, Islamic scholars. It's really not for me. But I would still say that the probability of the Catholic Church being the most correct is still the highest. So that's why I don't really buy the numerous gods argument, though it does make sense. Secondly, so changing the way you act and changing your mind and your belief system, right? So again, I want to point out, like, what one of the things that Bayesian epistemology or Bayesian probability does is it changes the way you think in general, right? So, like, again, the frequentist idea of how we use statistics, and I know this gets a little offshoot, but a lot of people here are probably not very familiar with this, right? So when a frequentist makes a bet or a frequentist does an action with the statistic, right, they're reacting to what the statistic does. A Bayesian says, well, we have all of these things that lead to what this probability will be, and those are conditionals. Now, even in the probability matrix, we're still looking at what is the best bet for maximizing. It doesn't have to always be the maximum number. It doesn't have to be proven true beyond a reasonable doubt. It just has to be proven true that you would maximize what you get. So again, changing the way you act is a utility movement. So if you view that, all right, so the probability that that Jesus Christ and that God exists as the Christian God is, let's even snowball it at 20%, right? What are the benefits that are going to happen that also come in hand with me changing my behavior and changing my belief? Because it's not just picking that, because the bet has to be made that I'm maximizing something so that I win, right? Do you want to bet, let's say we're playing blackball or the Russian roulette. We're playing Russian roulette. Do you want to bet on a color? Do you want to bet on a number? Or do you want to bet on the hotspot? You're going to bet on a color most likely because that's going to give you the biggest chance to win. But it also allows you to have the biggest amount of winning, right? If you bet on a number. So let's say you have $10,000. You can put $9,000 on a color and $1,000 on a number. If you get that number, you gain more than what you would have gotten there. So it makes sense and it's rational for you to bet there. And that's the betting idea behind Bayesian epistemology. And that's the way we would bet. So I bet my life, my belief system, that one, it's going to make my life better by acting within the traditions of the Catholic Church. It's going to make my life better by acting within the traditions of how a Christian should act. And it will make my life better by acting in the world as if a God exists. So even if I am wrong, I'm still maximizing the utility by changing my mind on the bet that there is a God.
So yeah, a couple of things that you said there. The first thing you said there was that the probabilistic outcome, based on I had said that there are numerous different gods, numerous different religions, and you said that the pragmatic decision and the probabilistic outcome does lead to Catholicism with a mix of Lutheranism. And my answer to this is you believe this because of your geography. If you were born in China, you would not believe that conclusion. We actually know this from a probabilistic outcome. The probabilistic outcome is if you were born in India, you would currently think that Hinduism is the most rational probabilistic choice. If you were born in a different century, you might believe Druidism is the most rationalistic, probabilistic outcome. If you're born in China today, probably it's not going to be Christianity. Your worldview is inherently shaped by the time period and the geography in which you are born. You are acting like you can come to this conclusion, and yet you yourself have been in the place in which you've grown up. And so when we talk about the probabilistic outcome, I don't think you can even say that in the first place. I also don't want to turn this into a debate over what is the most rational religion. But it certainly is clear that every single religion is an argument against the next religion. Because each one of these religions says, I've had this experience, how can you take this away from me? And many believers say, this is a strong point in favor of my religion. Except that the next religion right next to them says the same exact thing about a completely different God. So each of these religions counter the religion next to it, which suggests that none of them are, or maybe all of them, in some way or another, have some aspect of accuracy, but none of them are the correct aspect of accuracy. You responded to the way that I said that it changes the way you think to believe in a religion. And you said that when a frequentist makes a bet, they react based on the statistical outcome and what has the best statistical outcome. What is the best bet for maximizing your outcomes? I actually completely agree with that mindset. I do think that makes a lot of sense. But I would respond by saying you should break it down individually. Instead of starting with, there's a 51% chance that Lutheran Christianity is accurate. Therefore, I will believe all tenets of Lutheran Christianity. That's not a statistically reasonable thing to do. A much more statistically reasonable thing to do would be to say, there's a 51% chance that Lutheran Christianity is accurate, and there is a 57% chance that their position on homosexuality is logically founded. So I will believe in Lutheranism as a general rule, and I will believe in their position on homosexuality as a general rule. There is also a 97% chance that their position on abortion is wrong, and I can break this down logically. And then, based on that, you would disbelieve their position on abortion. You shouldn't just take the religion and then put faith in it, faith in the religion. You would have to break it down individually. I believe that this would be a much better way of adjusting the to the evidence on this and the statistics, is that you would take it for yourself. So I'll just say what I do. I'm agnostic, but I do think that there is a higher probability of there being a creator than not a creator. So I call myself an agnostic theist, which isn't very common. Usually there's just agnostic atheists. I do think there's likely someone who some deity of some sort who created the universe. I don't know if that deity still exists, and if they do, I don't think that it's represented in any of the current religions, at least the way they say they see him. But I do think that all of them, to some extent, have some aspect of that, which is part of the reason why I would say if I was to put faith in any one individual religion, they would need to show to a reasonable degree of certainty, look, my religion is so much better than anyone else. Here is the evidence. Here's how I get there. And then I will say, oh, you know what? That's actually right. I will put faith in your religion instead of all these others. And I will let your religion change the way I think about everything else, because there's such a high degree of probability that your religion is accurate. But if there's only a 51% chance that, say, Buddhism is correct, I'm not going to switch to Buddhism and say everything you preach is right, because there's a 49% chance that each and every individual one of their tenets is inaccurate. Which means that there is probably almost a 100% chance that something that they believe I will have come to the wrong conclusion on if I believe in Buddhism by faith. This is why I think you have to break it down individually, and it's why you would have to put a reasonable degree of certainty into the proof before you are to accept that as true.
Okay, so first off, I want to point to that statement about where I land in the world and how my history is. So I want to ask you a question. Why does that not commit the genetic fallacy?
Why does it?
Well, because you're trying to set the irrelevance of based solely on my history, my origin, or the source of the religion and its geographical area, rather than its current meaning or context, right? So in the world, Christian religion is still the largest religion, and there's plenty of people in India who are Christian. There are still plenty of people around the world that are Christian. In China, it touches every place in the world. So why would I somehow not be influenced directly by that when we can see that people are directly influenced by that?
Let me ask you this. What religion do you know the most about?
Actually, probably Taoism.
Okay. But Christianity is certainly one of the top ones, right?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, that's not saying that I don't know, but and then secondly,
I know. I'm not suggesting that you have not studied. I'm sure you have studied a lot of religions. But the fact of the matter is, when there are 4,000 of them that are all claiming to be this one true religion, or at least claiming they are the most true religion, there's no way that any reasonable person can objectively weigh all of their claims and study them to a point where we can say with certainty, yes, this one is accurate. These 3,999 plus are all inaccurate. So it's necessarily sorted by where you were born, which is part of the reason why most Americans lean toward Christianity, most Indians lean toward Hinduism, not because they've come to these rational conclusions, but because their culture and because their time period and because of the way that their friends talk, the way that everything leads them, pushes them into these categories. And that necessarily shifts the answer you're going to come to. Like, for instance, you come to Christianity, and it might be the correct answer, but it's also been shifted by the culture in which you were raised.
Well, I want to point out, so the culture, I'm a Southern Baptist by birth. I mean, my entire family is Southern Baptist. I don't agree with Baptists on roughly anything other than Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior. So I can't really say that that is, again, true, but that's just anecdotal. But I do get what you're saying. Like, I totally understand what you're saying. But what I'm pointing out is like, that's not the best way to go about that logically, right? Because it does commit the genetic fallacy, and it doesn't really rebut the exact statement that I'm going to be making next. I just wanted to point that out. Because the next is like the religion versus religion. And you're like, well, how can we test each religion? Well, one way to test religion is, how well did it survive? How well did its people survive? How were the outcomes associated with that religion acted out in the world? That's that American pragmatism. And I think we can all agree, whether you believe in God or not, if you act out the outcomes for each religion, the one that has done the best has been the Judeo-Christian God. And you could say that even as it fractured and after it fractured. I'm sure you can make a solid argument for Protestantism with the Protestant work ethic creating capitalism, and that being the single greatest invention to human reality. And then by that nature, I mean, that's a part of that conditional matrix that you're making, right? So it's a prior that you're adding in as a condition. How true is it? And then we use pragmatism to test its trueness. And that trueness gets slung back into our probability matrix. And that's why I lead to the conclusion that at minimum Christianity, and then between the Christian faiths, I'm sure there's a little bit of, divergence, but at the end of the day, it's the Christian faith, outside of a few like random things. But I would say, Catholicism and like American non-denominational, they're the same religion. They just see things slightly different, but it would still be Christianity as the true belief into the existence of God. And that's based on the pragmatism on figuring out how true it is being put back as a prior into the matrix. And then the output would say that there's a higher reason to believe in this. And then we're going to bet our money also with pragmatism as, okay, so let me explain this a little bit. So just so we can get further into this. Pragmatism is the first principle. Bayesianism is the epistemology that's leading us to coming back to the first principle for judgment. Does that make sense?
Mostly, yeah.
Okay, because I know it gets kind of weird. So I'm going to be honest, I've completely made this up myself. I don't think you're going to find this on YouTube. So this is something I've been toying around with. And, I'm going to be honest, when I came to the conclusion, the lights flickered in my head. And I was like, oh, that's brilliant. I want to try that out. And so far, it's like, no, seriously, I think it's a really strong argument despite everything, right? So you've got pragmatism on whether or not it's true, then the Bayesian analysis on whether or not you should bet for it. And you can only bet by your pragmatism. And you lay those two distinct ideas out. I think it would be I think it's irrational to not believe in God, because like you're only going to be benefited at the end of the day. So it's true, just based by the utility and based on the probability, it's true to believe in God and act as if God exists.
Okay, well, you took a major jump there at the end when you said that because of the utility of the belief, therefore you should believe it. Yeah, I know. Well, there's an element of pragmatism which is true, but you're taking it to an extreme there, because the benefit of a belief does not equate to its accuracy. Think of cults. Cults are nearly always completely inaccurate, and yet the people who join these cults say that it is fantastic for them. They love it. That's why they stay. Sometimes they're being pressured or forced into staying. Okay, so we're not talking about those, but there are a lot of cults and multi-level marketing and that sort of thing, where these people legitimately believe it's having benefits for them. But that doesn't mean the cult itself is the one true religion.
Well, it's not. Okay, so let me clarify this, because I think this kind of gets into the muddy waters. So I'm not talking just about an individual's utility. It's also about like the entire outcome. And that's why I go back to Christianity, right? So like the entire outcome that has happened, as an iterated set of games shows that the Christian religion has maximized the utility of individuals within the West.
But there are all sorts of things that are totally wrong that are still beneficial. This is why there's a common phrase, ignorance is bliss, which to a pretty clear level is true. Just because you have the correct answer doesn't mean it's going to work out for you. Like, for instance, people who are smart are often very conflicted inside, and they see the problems in the world, and that's harder for them. Someone who's stupid, like literally, if you wanted the utility of outcome, you tell people to be stupid. The people I know who are dumb often are very, very, very happy. That's the utility of the outcome there. You wouldn't want
that. That's like an individual's utility. What I'm saying, I'm not talking about like individual utility, even though there is a greater amount of individual utility in believing in God and the Christian religion. What I'm saying is like outcomes that are like overall, like, so I think the best way to look at it is like, so if when I mean utility of outcome, I mean, I'm benefiting myself. I'm benefiting my family. I'm benefiting my community. I'm benefiting the world. Each set has to necessarily be met to consider it the utility of outcome in this respect that I'm using now. So it's not just I feel happier, it's I feel happier and I'm doing something that benefits and makes the world a better place. And again, we go back to the Christian outcomes from Christianity when it started compared to all the other places and all the other religions. What has had the best outcomes? It would be the Judeo-Christian West.
outcome doesn't equal truth. Just because there's a good outcome doesn't mean the way that they got there was correct. That doesn't equate at all. But I do think that from just a purely pragmatic perspective, I do agree with you that there's nothing wrong with believing in something that's going to benefit your life, even if you know it's not necessarily true. That's part of the reason why I'm an agnostic theist. I recognize the fact that there's nothing wrong with a lot of the things that Christians are doing or Buddhists are doing. There's nothing wrong with it. But that doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it accurate. There's nothing wrong with just going along with it because it might benefit your life in a couple of different ways. But that doesn't mean their central claims are true. So this isn't a way of proving the truth of it in any way. It just means that, I mean, if you want to, you can go along with it, which is part of the reason why I say that the standard should be individual choices. Instead of just committing to Buddhism and then believing every tenet of Buddhism, you should say, I think there's a lot of good in Buddhism. I think there's a lot of good in it. And so I'm going to believe these parts of it. But this one thing that they said, that's stupid. That can't be accurate. Which is a much more rational way of approaching this. And it even matches with your calculus here. When you talk about how we can focus on the probabilities, we should focus on the probabilities, but we shouldn't do it just by one religion has 51% chance of being correct, so I'm going to believe everything about it. You could say, I think there's more of a chance of Buddhism being accurate than of Hinduism being accurate, but I think Hinduism has this one belief which logically has a much higher probability of being accurate than Buddhism had on that same claim. So if we break it down individually, we can still use all of your calculus and we come to a better conclusion. I will also respond to your thing about the way to test a religion is how well did it survive, and how the outcomes are acted out in the world. Well, a couple of things there. First of all, if that's the case, then Christianity today is getting less valuable because Christianity is losing believers. And Islam apparently would be more valuable because Islam is rapidly gaining believers. I don't think this is a way to test the accuracy of a religion at all. It could be a way to test the pragmatic benefit of, all right, I don't even care. I'm just going to go along with one of these places. And sure, I agree with you. You could go with that just because, it kind of benefits my life, so I'll just go along with them. But that doesn't mean they're right. And even within those religions themselves, it's very subjective because they're always growing or shrinking depending on the time period that you're in. And yeah, I'll just go with that for now.
So I don't think Christianity is not actually shrinking. In fact, the Christian church is still growing. It's roughly 2.9 billion people are Christians, or should be by. Okay, so the 2015 Pew Research said by 2050, the Christian population will be 2.9 billion. And large growth in evangelical Protestants and a large growth in, the Catholic Church is actually declining, but Protestantism is actually growing.
So to you, does that mean therefore that Catholicism is less valuable and less?
Right. Well, no. So again, like it's not just you're making this like single dimension. So first of all, it's a multi-dimensional look, right? So first of all, long run, the Christian world has done better. It's been better. People are freer. People are happier. The system itself is better versus Islam. We do agree on that. If you had to live in Iraq or Germany, you would live in Germany. That's hands down the truth. Secondly, it's not that Christianity is declining by any substantial rate. The only thing that's happening is the decline of Christianity in the West. And that's actually not a good thing because we watched the West eat itself alive and it's not doing good. So that should also point to you that as the Christian religion declines, as does the countries it's connected to. So that's one of those things that you have to look at. So that also, again, that's a conditional that we can look at and say, well, that makes plenty of sense. I'd bet my money on that. Next is that I'm not separating the Bayesian from the pragmatism, right? So pragmatism, first and foremost, pragmatism is literally whether or not something is true based on its outcomes, based on its idea of its functions and its practical outcomes. So, okay, so I'll give you an idea. All right, let's say that we didn't have a way to figure out whether or not gravity worked. We could say that pragmatically gravity works because it always works. Can you find a time and a place that gravity doesn't work? Deductively, I'm sure you can, but this is an inductive way of looking at things. So we do know that gravity is true, whether or not having to prove it, because it always works.
Well,
you cannot
so that would be much closer to my calculus than yours.
Right.
Because you're saying that in 99% of circumstances it's accurate, therefore
Right.
There's a reasonable degree of certainty. And I do agree with you that sort of calculus is good, but I don't think that means, hey, look, gravity in 51% of circumstances appears right, so we're going to say gravity is true.
No. So this is why I'm trying to get to it. All right, so the first thing that we do is we have all right, so I'm taking my Bayesian epistemology and I'm looking back at the historical context of Christianity or any other religion, right? And so I'm laying all of these things, whether or not they're true or false. By doing that, I'm using the American pragmatism to say whether this action was true or whether this action was false, right? So that truth-false table, right? So we can make a truth table. I'm sure you've done it. Have you ever done a truth table? I don't mean to be insulting, but
I think I might have done that in school. I don't remember.
Yeah, well, it's okay. So you just make it like true, false, false, false on everything.
Yeah.
And then you go along. So if and only if, so on and so forth, the combination of sets and everything like that. So you go down that whole line on whether or not it's true. And then you've got that final bracket, and that bracket's going to have a lot of truth and some falses, right? So I'm sure not all arguments for God are absolutely true. Some of them don't even make sense from a Christian perspective, right? And so we're looking at all of those true, and this, okay, well, pragmatically, this is true. Now, let's use that in our Bayesian approach to figure out how much probability, by all of these things being true and all of these things being false, whether or not we should believe. Okay, well, again, let's say that it actually says that we shouldn't believe because there's only a 40% probability that God is the Christian God and exists. Now we go back to American pragmatism. All right, so we've done all of our calculations, we've pulled everything out, and we're looking at it in the broad sense. And it says, all right, 40% chance that Jesus Christ was resurrected and God exists and all of this. Should I believe in God? Well, then I apply pragmatism back to it. And that pragmatism says, you know what? So far, I've only seen benefits from this. in this long, extensive calculus that I've done, sure, there's problems that have happened, but this long, extensive calculus, this long truth table, the epistemology that I'm using, it says that even if I bet for Jesus Christ, it would have a better outcome if I did that. Therefore, I ought to believe it, even if the probability is below the probability that there is no God, because the outcome outweighs the lack of outcome from the other side.
Well, okay, so I do understand where you're going with that. That if it's 40% probability of maybe being true versus 0% to lose, there's a 40% chance of an advantage. So you would go with the 40%. I agree with you on that. But that's why I was presenting the fact that if you are going to believe in this 40% thing, if you're going to believe in a religion, that changes multiple other aspects of you. So there actually is a significant potential disadvantage if you're believing in something that is inaccurate. For instance, if I was to say there is a 15% chance that Islam is true, well, I'm going to completely radically shift. Just if I choose to believe in Islam, I'm going to have a complete radical shift in how I view everything else in the world. And that's going to have a significant detriment to a lot of the, well, okay, I shouldn't use Islam as an example, but let's say that I believe in the murderous snake god, right? There's a 15% chance that the murderous snake god from Venus is the one true faith. Well, if I believe in that 15%, and the outcomes of agreeing with that murderous snake god, I've actually significantly harmed the way that I look at the world. This is why I think it would make much more sense to just say, you know what, there's a 50% chance that maybe that venomous snake god from Venus is accurate, but he has so many ridiculous beliefs that it just doesn't make sense for me to agree with him. So I'm not going to accept any of those beliefs. I'm going to break it down individually and say, Snake God has one good belief. I agree with him on that. The other 99.9% of his beliefs are stupid, and I can verify that probabilistically, so I'm not going to believe in those beliefs.
No, I get that. And don't get me wrong, I think that's completely rational. But what I'm saying is like you're choosing a religion, right? Like, again, let's say we're just going out and shopping, or again, let's go back to betting because that's the best way to think of Bayesian analysis. So I'm betting. The only rational conclusion that I can get from betting is one, like the events have to be like mutually exclusive and exhaustive, right? So it has to be one, and I can only pick one, right? And so doing that analysis is where we come to that conclusion. And I'm sure you can do the analysis for other religions compared to.
But you don't have to pick one. That's what I'm saying. You can be agnostic. You can say, look, the fact that none of these religions are conclusively proved, none of them are, means that we shouldn't believe in any of them individually because they all contradict each other. But what we can do is we can take them a la carte. We can say, all right, there are pieces that I like of Islam. There are pieces I like of Buddhism. And I can, according to a probabilistic calculus, say there is a benefit to believing in this aspect of Christianity. And this, you even do this yourself. Because you have parts of Lutheranism, parts of Catholicism. I think that's a great way of doing it, but that doesn't mean what you're saying. It means that you should just necessarily believe just because there's a 51% chance.
Okay, so you're right, and I think I probably shouldn't have said that, and I probably should have clarified that more. If I was to go to church, I do not go to church, one, because I am Catholic. But the reason why I say I fall under Lutheranism is because the only churches around here that are very conservative are actually Lutheran churches. It's actually a sad reality. This place in North Carolina that I'm at has a huge influence in the Catholic Church from the Latin American Catholic Church. I don't know if you know anything about that. They're like steeped in cultural Marxism and Marxism in general. And I'm not going to go to a church and be, attacked for social justice. So I do end up going to a Lutheran, even though I don't agree with everything that they have, but they do agree a lot more with Catholicism than people think. Anyway, I just want to end this and say I thank you for this debate, and I do hope that at some point in time you're going to come back to this and think a little bit more on it, and rather more than a debate format, just kind of think of it in general, and not even like shape your beliefs, but just shape some idea of how you feel about beliefs in general, because I think that this is probably the most rational and the best way to come to a conclusion without trying to scientifically prove God, which I do not think can happen.
Yeah, I mean, I mostly agree with you. I do think that a lot of it will come down to a probabilistic analysis, which is actually kind of how I do come to my conclusions. But that's part of the reason I would be agnostic theist rather than necessarily. Actually, it sounds like what your conclusion leads to is also the same thing, an agnostic theist.